Okay, thank you, Grace, for the presentation. Thank you, Christina, for the organization invitation. And thanks, Christina, for accepting me. As we've seen, the British occupation of Manila has multiple repercussions for a series of people in Southeast Asia and in Europe. Today, I would like to present some considerations regarding the triangle of relations between the Sultan of Sulu, the British, and the Spanish in the events surrounding the occupation. The purpose of my presentation is to show that the Sultanate of Sulu was in the back of the minds of the Spaniards and the British alike during the occupation, not as primary concern maybe, but very present as a secondary concern. And I'll try to highlight the reasons for that. Evidently, the European actors were the powerful ones. The Sulu Sea is home to the Tausug and to many other nations. It represents a strategic zone that was of interest to both European powers. Besides, the continuous incursion of Sulu-based raiders and their massive capture of indigenous vassals of the Spanish monarchy were a thorn in the flesh of the Spanish colonial endeavors in Southeast Asia. On a political level, Manila never knew how to negotiate with the Sultan state. Their political system can be seen as a complex network structure between many powerful Tausug families all over the islands. The Sultan could easily be replaced. The political uncertainty seemed to have ended in 1733 with the election of a new powerful Sultan, Azim. He was extremely enigmatic, and hence the Spaniards thought to have a more tangible counterpart in the Sulu archipelago than before. They now saw a person that really seemed to represent the state of Sulu. Right from the start, Azimuddin engaged in pro-Spanish politics. He sent an embassy to Manila, which signed a treaty of friendship with Spain in 1737. The treaty included peaceful relations, mutual protection of commerce, and military resistance. Spain treated Sulu as an independent sovereign power at that point. Faced with the internal opposition of his brother Bantilan, Azimuddin traveled several times to the Spanish fortress of Zamboanga, and in 1747, Manila and Sulu organized together a large joint military operation against the Tirun, a non-Muslim ethnic group in northern Borneo that was repeatedly raiding the Philippines. This operation reinforced the bond between Spaniards and Azimuddin and demonstrated his determination to political competitors. The ultimate marker of Spanish recognition of the Sulu, of the Sultan, was a proper that the Sulu Sultan was a proper political heavyweight, was a letter he received from King Philip V that very year. The reception of that letter was done with much pomp and the highest reverential honors for the Spanish envoy. The king's letter confirmed the agreements of the treaty of 10 years earlier. In the middle of the 18th century, Azimuddin's strategic interest can roughly be described in the following manner. First, to dominate the native ethnicities in the area. Second, to intensify the trade with China. Third, to maintain peace with the European neighbors. And third, to maintain interiorly his power. Yet the latter was a problem, as he had made many enemies, especially due to his closeness to the Spaniards and his uncommon accumulation of power. In September of 1748, the opposing faction staged an attack on his person, and Azimuddin fled with his retinue to Zamboanga, while his brother Bantilan took over the government, which reactivated raiding in the Philippines. The peaceful setting that had started with the election of Azimuddin as Sultan hence ended with his flight. Tausug and Tirun raiders raided again in large numbers, and in 1750, an alliance was formed between the Maguindanao, the Sulu, and the Tirun, mobilizing about 10,000 warriors. In January of 1749, Azimuddin arrived in Manila with about 70 followers. The Spaniards welcomed him with all the pomp and solemnity of a state ruler. The perception of the exiled Sultan was between two extremes. Either he was perceived as a traitor and a threat who had staged his own escape, or he was the hope to reinforce even more the Spanish-Sulu bond, advancing the Catholic mission in Asia. In that regard, the pro-Azimuddin fraction was able to rejoice as the Sultan was baptized in April of 1750. Sultan Bantilan in Jolo, in the meantime, wanted to restore the peace of Spain, but was confronted with a very belligerent fortress commander in Zamboanga. Based on the Spanish narrative, Sulu was part of Spain since about 200 years, and therefore the new Spanish governor, Francisco de Ovando, was keen on incorporating Sulu fully into the colony. The return of the rightful Sultan to Sulu was part of that strategy. The next year, the Spaniards attacked the Sulu capital while Azimuddin was still on his way south. The official goal was to restore him as the ruler of the Sulu. But even more important was the pacification of the Sulu and the installment of tribute payments. After 2 weeks, the Spanish siege of Jolo was lifted, peace and liberation of prisoners was promised, and the Sulu Dato would continue negotiation as soon as Azimuddin would arrive in Zamboanga. When Azimuddin finally landed, he was visited by many high-ranking datus from Sulu, and he sent letters to the Sultan of Maguindanao. As the visitors were often armed and his letters to Maguindanao seemed very treacherous, he was soon arrested under suspect of treason. The project to restore him was sacked, and the Sulu were declared mortal enemies of Spain. Azimuddin and his retinue were returned to Manila as slaves. A Spanish military operation was started right away, which was not aimed at conquest, but at destruction. However, this whole operation was a disaster for Spain and ended in the loss of hundreds of lives. Another Spanish advance against Sulu was at this point an alliance with the Sultan of Brunei, which included the donation of the disputed island of Palawan to the Spaniards. With Mindanao also loosely allied at that moment, the Sulu seemed to be surrounded. Effective support from Brunei and Mindanao for the Spaniards, however, was scarce. After over a year of intense aggressions from both sides, peace was negotiated with the Azimuddin fraction in Jolo between 1753 and 55, and the letter to Bantilan was sent. Governor Arandia understood that the system of the Sulu state consisted in a widespread Tausug network and was not focused on any person. Hence, he considered that a conquest of the capital would be futile, in sharp contrast to what had said Ovando before. Instead, Arandia opted for the recognition of Bantilan as Sultan and to intensify trade with Sulu. In return, Bantilan formally accepted the geopolitical superiority of Spain. In those years, Sulu raids were few, but the situation was far from peaceful due to Maguindanao and Malanao raiders. New investigations rehabilitated Azimuddin, and Arandia decided to return all prisoners to Jolo. Only Azimuddin and his son Israel should remain in Manila until the claims of the throne were accepted. In April of 1755, a treaty of peace and friendship was signed, and over 100 Sulu were returned back home. Overall, the Spanish plan was again to return Azimuddin and make him Sultan under the Spanish crown. According to historian Cesar Majul, Governor General Rojo intended even to return Azimuddin back to Sulu, which was not carried out because of the British occupation. Shortly after the 1755 peace agreement, royal decrees arrived in Manila with the usual delay from Madrid, and they were ordering the annihilation of Sulu. However, Governor Arandia was inclined not to engage in direct war with Bantilan for two reasons. First, the other raiders were far more threatening in these years, and second, for lack of funds. The royal treasury had still not recovered from the blow that the British Admiral George Anson had dealt them when they captured the Manila galleon in 1743, causing a 5-year supply shortage from New Spain. And we've just seen the impact of such a disaster on a financial level. In any case, faced with an arbitrary Spanish behavior between friendship and war, the Tausug and Jolo were happy to welcome the British East India Company around 1761 as a new partner in the region. Due to the British occupation of Manila 1 year later, the Zulu stopped regarding Spain as the most powerful European power in the region, and Great Britain took its place. Until the middle of the 18th century, the East India Company had stayed out of Southeast Asia, mainly because the Dutch dominance there. But now Chinese trade restrictions made the company look for new ways to generate new profit, and so it explored new ways of commerce. A possible new way to connect China included the Sulu Sea, and therefore in 1760, the governor of Madras tasked the young company servant Alexander Dalrymple to establish for the first time diplomatic and trade relation with the Sulu Sultanate. Dalrymple, of whom we've heard yesterday that he had gastric problems and a skin rash, I think. Dalrymple visited Sulu at the beginning of 1761 and signed a treaty of friendship with the Sultan Bantilan, including the promise that the company would be granted to choose a place for a factory and be given the privilege to trade in the Sulu realms. While the importation of opium was at first rejected and English weapons were only to be delivered to the Sultan, other products such as iron, steel, lead, glass, and cloth from India were in high demand. In November of 1761, Dalrymple traveled to Manila, where he learned of the presence of another Sultan, Azimuddin, and his son Israel. Dalrymple seized the opportunity and obtained also Azimuddin's signature under Treaty of Commerce and Mutual Assistance. In any case, the British first delivery of Southeast Asian goods to Sulu and consequently of Sulu products to China yielded only very little profit. In September of 1762, another step was taken and Bantilan ceded the island of Balambangan to the British just off Brunei's coast. The strategic importance of Balambangan lay in a series of factors: the closeness to Brunei and its position as a transit route of Chinese traffic between Borneo, Sulu, and Mindanao. And besides, it had the two excellent harbors, was equipped with freshwater, timber, fish, and a dense vegetation. And finally, being an island, it seemed to be easy to defend. The British did not hesitate. While in London, the Court of Directors still did not accept a company settlement there at the time, Dalrymple, however, sailed to Balambangan and hoisted the British banner, without any immediate effect. This was the situation when Draper and Cornish moved into the Bay of Manila. The conquest of the city was part of the larger scheme of breaking the Bourbon dominance overseas in the course of the 7 Years' War. In any case, the goal of the British attack was not, as William Shortis stated, to conquer the Philippines. Such a scheme was only part of some initial plans. Instead, the joint EIC and Royal Navy operation was aimed at delivering a hard, heavy blow to Spain, weakening its hold on America, and to secure for the EIC the island of Mindanao, which was not considered to be part of the Spanish Empire. However, in the end, the military force provided was not enough to conquer and hold Mindanao. Instead, the focus was almost exclusively laid on Manila. On the long run, Dalrymple's commercial plans with Sulu were much more reasonable than for the EIC than any occupation or conquest, and the company was very well aware of that. Azimuddin, who was allegedly supporting the Spaniards in defense, was captured outside of Manila and brought to the capital, where he was treated honorably. The British in Manila, Dalrymple amongst them, had still Sulu on their minds and the land concession given to them. Already at the end of February of 1763, they discussed reinstalling Azimuddin in Jolo. In March, Azimuddin signed another alliance with the EIC. In exchange for supporting their throne pretensions, the Sultan confirmed former agreements and conceded the British free trade in Sulu and again territories in Borneo and Jolo. Interestingly, these very islands had been donated to Spain by Brunei 11 years earlier, the very same islands. The plan to return Azimuddin to Jolo and the promise of a British factory there were made the Spanish and Manila adopt countermeasures. A Spanish judge wrote letters to the Dutch East India Company to inform them of the British plans, which was aimed at mounting their opposition. Yet the letter was stopped before it could reach its destiny. On an official basis, the imprisoned Spanish governor, Rojo, protested against Israel's and Azimuddin's return and against the British treaties with Sulu, highlighting earlier agreements with the Sultan. Yet the British insisted denying Spain all rights of possession of Sulu. Once Bantilan learned in Jolo from the British occupation, he congratulated the ERC and offered military assistance if needed. Prince Israel was soon sent back from Manila to Jolo to prepare the return of his father. Acting Sultan Bantilan died during these weeks, and Israel took over the government together with 3 sons of Bantilan, exemplifying once more the fragmented and complex way of the Sulu government. During these days, Alexander Dalrymple was traveling between Manila, Jolo, and Batavia. And in September 1763, yet another treaty was signed confirming the former alliance. Moreover, it concretized that the ERC should get the islands of Balambangan and half of Palawan and some territories in northern Borneo. In Dalrymple's view, Balambangan was strategically the perfect place to launch a factory and the British-Chinese colony, which would be a strong base for the company in Southeast Asia. When the bulk of the British fleet left Manila under the lead of Dalrymple, Azimuddin, after 16 years of custody, left Manila. In May of 1764, the old Sultan returned to Jolo and resumed his title. Without the approval of the ERC Council in Madras, Dalrymple organized the ratification of Azimuddin's cession, which included parts of northeast Borneo, Palawan, and basically all of the islands in between. The company became the owner of these islands, whereas Prince Israel was pronounced as governor. With that cession and the new treaty of friendship, Dalrymple left for China. When Spain took over Manila again, the Spanish governor sent letters to Madras to protest against a British establishment in Sulu. According to their reasoning, this would go against the Treaty of Paris and even go against the Treaty of Munster over 100 years ago. Apparently, the protest, even though weak in argumentation, was enough to delay the Sulu plan of the company. Yet, even more importantly, the Dutch now were fully aware of the British plans, and the Dutch protested diplomatically against this competition. At the same time, the Dutch also created facts and launched ships from Batavia, intimidating the company. The Madras superiors of Dalrymple would still have been inclined to accept the action decision. However, things took a different turn. When Dalrymple departed from Jolo, he left there 400 sepoy troops in Jolo to be picked up 2 months later. After 6 months, they ran out of money and supplies, and tension broke out with the Sulu. Many sepoy got killed, and they were finally picked up by a British ship. Thence, the British-Sulu relations deteriorated, and in addition, the Madras governor and council had no Sulu grants or treatises in their hands, as Dalrymple had taken all of them with him to London without leaving any copies. And in London, the Sulu project was stopped for some time. Jolo, in the meantime, developed its position as a prosperous trading center for Europeans and Chinese. Back in London, Dalrymple proposed to the court of directors of the company another voyage of discovery in the area, and the company started an intense assessment of the project. Sorry, I got lost. The problem was that the ERC in London had to consider the Dutch and Spanish objections, so it took some time to dwell on that. In 1768 only, the company sent a petition to the king proposing to take possession of Balambangan. The purpose was to create an entrepot between India, China, Southeast Asia, and the Isles of the Pacific. The scrutiny, as well as the negotiation of the terms of the project, dragged on for years, and Dalrymple was dismissed due to his exorbitant demands. However, the preparations continued, and finally in 1771, definite orders were issued to Captain Swithin on the Britannia. In 1772, Captain Swithin delivered the company instructions to the president and council in Bombay, yet Mr. John Herbert, the chief of the undertaking, was slow in the implementation and even opposed to the project, as he saw no advantage in establishing a factory in Balambangan. He seemed to be much more interested in his own private profits than in the benefit of the empire. In Sulu, Prince Israel had by then assumed the Sultanate and received congratulations from the Spanish king. During these years, 2 strong fractions existed among the Tausug in Jolo, one for Spain and the other one for the British. When the Britannia arrived in Sulu in the middle of 1773, it was well received. During his stay, Mr. Herbert left no occasion to make legal and illegal profits, defrauding the company on various levels. He extended his stay in Jolo to 4 months, and not surprisingly, dispute broke out between Sulu and the crew members of the Britannia, which however could be settled. His mismanagement of a total of £230,000 was excessive, and soon the ERC directors would render a hard judgment on his conduct. Yet for the time, Mr. Herbert was still commanding the expedition, which finally cast anchor in Balambangan in December of '73, 2.5 years later after Britannia had received its orders. Within a year, Mr. Herbert organized the creation of a proper village, a harbor, a stockade at the northern bay of Balambangan. Yet things did not go as expected. Ships were lost to pirates, to weathers, to disinterest of commerce, and the lucrative trade with Manila was forbidden. On the other hand, a decent trade developed with Brunei and with Mindanao. Yet no profits were ever registered. Instead, loads of credit bonds were issued without the backing of the company. In other words, Mr. Herbert and his team were highly corrupt, misusing their position of power to increase their profits. Southern Israel started feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the British factory in its vicinity and sought the benevolence of Manila in this situation. And at that moment, in February 1775, native warriors under the Tausug Datuk Teteng attacked the factory and rapidly ousted the British, killing many of them in the act. Initially, Teteng had been sent by the Sultan to support the British with their constructions. Yet he had incurred large debts, and when he was not able to pay back the money, he was publicly humiliated. That might be one of the reasons why he attacked. The British left behind material amounting to almost 1 million pesos. It is unclear how the Sultan knew of this matter or if he even ordered the attack. Another theory maintains that Mr. Herbert was fully aware of the imminent attack and on purpose did not defend the villagers adequately, maybe to cover up for his mismanagement. In any case, as the Teteng was a subject of Sulu, the ERC demanded 400,000 pesos as a compensation, but did not get anything. The Teteng returned to Jolo and shared the enormous booty of merchandise, money, supplies, weapons, and ship with the Tausug leaders. Southern Israel hence had a handsome profit from the enterprise, and Manila was content the British were gone. Once the British competitors were gone, and with the massive British spoil, the Sulu Sultanate rose in subsequent years even more to a strong regional emporium, giving it a considerable advantage over its neighbors, especially the Mindanao. After the fall of Balambangan, the British continued their efforts in the region, building a factory in Labuan, Brunei. Yet the ERC directors made it clear that they did not want any establishment, and so the ERC withdrew from the region, much to the relief of Spanish Manila. And concluding, this chapter of British expansion started with Dalrymple's discoveries and approaches to Sulu, reached the peak during the British occupation of Manila, and another peak with the establishment of the Balambangan factory. Yet this first British outreach into Southeast Asia ended in a disaster, discouraging the company to attempt any major endeavor in Southeast Asia for the next decade. Thank you.